There are probably billions with a B, billions of dollars that are being poured into the longevity science component. And admittedly, 99.9% of that is human. And so right now, schmoes like me are looking at trying to understand human longevity science and see what we can apply safely to the patients in our care.
Longevity medicine is one of the hottest topics in veterinary medicine right now. But while the research and the drug companies are making headlines, what's being done in general practice? You've probably heard of the Dog Aging Project. Maybe you've seen L'Oreal's ads around drug development to extend dogs' lifespan. Longevity medicine is having a moment in veterinary medicine. But while one is research and the other is drug development, there is a quieter and equally important conversation happening at the practice level. What does longevity science actually look like in general practice today? That's where Dr. Kevin Toman comes in. Kevin is a companion animal veterinarian with over 40 years of experience, 8 practices built from the ground up, and a deep conviction that we can extend the average pet's life if we start early and think holistically. His interest in longevity didn't come from a trend, it came from watching senior pets lose their owners and being placed back into shelters, and from a personal health scare in his 40s that led him into integrative medicine. Now, through his telehealth consulting practice, Kevin works with pet owners across the country, including in places where specialty care is hard to find, to build long-term longevity plans for older pets centered on diagnostics, dental care, integrative therapies, and emerging prescription longevity drugs. In this conversation, we talk about what longevity science looks like in practice right now, what his dream senior pet longevity clinic would look like, and why he believes this may be the biggest opportunity in veterinary medicine for the next decade. Let's get to the conversation with Dr. Kevin Toman. When did you know that you were interested in veterinary medicine as a career?
From grade school on, I knew that I wanted to be a veterinarian. And this was back in, gosh, I shudder at saying this, but it was back in the late 60s, early 70s of the preceding century. And so it's been a long time, a long journey, but it's been quite a ride within veterinary medicine.
Oh, fascinating. So how did you know? Did you grow up around animals, or is there anything that you still remember?
I did. I grew up back in Illinois farmland, and so large animals and small animals were both part of my environment back then. And so, like many veterinarians from that generation anyway, I started out in a mixed animal practice, doing both large and small animal work, and over time gradually evolved more towards the small, picked up some emergency work along the way, and the rest was history. So I ended up as kind of a small animal practice with an emphasis on surgeries.
Exciting. So you said Illinois, and I know you went to vet school in California at UC Davis. So what got you to California?
My family back then. We were very much a traditional family. My folks were both in education. And so they started out as high school teachers, and then my father ended up teaching at the university out here. And as families did back then, we went along for the ride.
UC Davis is definitely known as a very good school, so that speaks volumes to him. That was probably a big promotion, so exciting opportunity for the family. So you mentioned you started maybe more large, ended up mixed, and then small animal. Going back to vet school, you went into vet school thinking you would do large, and that evolved over vet school, or more like after you got in practice?
After I got into practice, I was practicing in a rural area in Northern California, kind of the gold rush country, for those of you familiar with it, and found that, my large animal work, and I was fascinated by it. There's a lot of beef cattle back then, and those families were just simply salt of the earth. I love my interactions with them. But there were times when I would be busy all day long and see 2 appointments because they were separated by 75 or 100 miles, literally. And so it was just a very inefficient way to practice. And those same families wanted more and more small animal work. And so I read the writing on the wall and opened a little brick and mortar clinic, and away we went.
Opening up a clinic is also a journey in itself. So what was it like opening up a practice and building that from scratch?
Well, I've always been a little bit of an entrepreneur. I would confide in you that through my 40 plus years of veterinary practice, I have built from the ground up and then sold 8 different veterinary practices through Northern California into Colorado and then back again to California. And so you never think you're as smart as you What's the best way to phrase this? When you get out of veterinary school, you think you're God's gift to the world. And, so I was convinced that I knew everything I needed to know to open up a successful small animal practice. And the reality is that, I was book smart, but perhaps practice dumb. I learned an awful lot from some senior technicians that I hired along the way. I learned an awful lot about business along the way. There were countless mistakes. And if your listeners can avoid a few of those, more power to them. But the reality is that, especially in business, there are some lessons to be learned. And, I think that over time, I grew better at treating the patients in my care. And I also grew better at taking care of their pet parents. I mean, I'm very much a relationship guy. Maybe not the world's best veterinarian, but I pride myself on my relationship skills. And that was something that I learned along the way.
Yeah. And that's going to be super important too when you talk about going into telehealth, because I think being able to build
Mhm.
relationships in a long distance fashion is also very,
Absolutely.
very important. But no, I remember you talking about that. Like you were the vet who came into the exam room and sat on the floor and spoke with the pet
Yeah.
owner in a family like kind of way, right? Like there is that something special about your family veterinarian where you watch the pet's life.
I mean, I was fortunate in that, again, I practiced in some fairly rural areas. And so I was kind of the de facto emergency clinic back in the day. But I was able to see pets grow from puppy or kittenhood all the way through adulthood. And then eventually, into the next generation. Many of the pet parents and I became close friends. And that was very rewarding to me.
Yeah. One of the things you also said when we were chatting before is that one of the things you miss most even now when you kind of look back is having a team, and you miss the laughter, and yes, there were tears sometimes, but you miss that team bonding. So what did you enjoy most about building a really good team that enjoyed working together, and any things that you look back and kind of say, hey, this is what I learned through my time building all those practices?
I would say that I learned how to become a better boss over many years in veterinary clinics. Yeah, and that is an acquired skill. I mean, again, you come out of veterinary school and you think you have one skill set, but if you can't work with other people, then it's going to be hard for you to be successful, whatever path of veterinary medicine you choose. And so over time, we developed a little bit of a reputation within the areas that I have practiced in. And so we were able to attract very good team members, top quality technicians, the very best receptionists around, a great office manager. And so we really tried to be a practice of excellence, and we had an open book policy. The lowest technician, the lowest CSR was able to look at our practice income, and we set practice goals. We set individual goals for each team member. We had daily rounds. And so we really did everything we could to build a team atmosphere of excellence. And we were in the hunt for perfection. And I don't know if we ever achieved it, but we were in the hunt.
Also going back, we were talking about watching the pet's full life from puppy to kitten into the senior years, and you also had moments of reflecting on, just speaking of perfection, right? Like, are there other ways of doing things? And you mentioned two kind of big moments that really made you think a little bit different about at least the medicine component. You mind sharing that kind of transition and those few stories that really moved you into looking for other things?
Well, professionally, because I was in kind of a general practice and we grew to be fairly large practices in these areas, we had a number of older clients, older pet parents. And so things happen in cycles in veterinary medicine. You may not see a block kitty for 3 months, and then on one Saturday, you see four of them. And so, for whatever reason, we saw a number of older pets that were being orphaned, quote unquote, as their pet parents died. These were little poodles or little chihuahuas or schnauzers or whatever the case may be that had a single pet parent, a single older mom in most cases. And as these older moms died, these small pets, these aged pets, were essentially being put up for adoption again, being run through a shelter. And that just killed me. I mean, Jesus, that's a horrible thing to think about for an older individual, whether you walk on two legs or four, being run through a shelter setting or a hospice setting. and then trying to be rehomed and find a new family. And so that really kind of set the table for me. I have always loved the challenges and the interactions with older pets, the cancer cases, the chronic pain, the heart issues that accompany geriatric care. And so I realized that there was a real need, a real opportunity to make a difference for some of these older pets. And that kind of prompted my interest in longevity science.
And then I think you said at the same time you went through a little bit of a health scare. I say little. No,
It was a
a
little
health scare
back in
is
the
not
day, but
little.
yeah, yeah, I was 43 or 44 at that point in time, and got diagnosed with a little bit of high creatinine and one just routine blood draw. And so went through all the diagnostics and was told by a local internal medicine doc that I had multiple myeloma, which really meant back then it's time to start digging a hole. And I was, of course, that scared the heck out of me. And there were a lot of reflection that went on, but I also self-referred down to the Mayo Clinic and jumped through a bunch of diagnostic hoops and found out that that was not the case, that I did not have myeloma, but I did have a precursor called monoclonal gammopathy of unknown significance. And, it's a little worrisome when folks start using the phrase unknown significance around your own health, but it is a benign condition with a relatively small annual incidence of transferring into myeloma. And so, as every one of us would do, you hit the books, try to figure out how you can stop that malignant transformation from occurring. And I found that there was no pharmaceutical that could do so. But interestingly, there was an herb, curcumin, that had been proven to help slow or sometimes even stop that progression from MGUS into multiple myeloma. And so that was really what prompted my interest in herbal therapy or integrative medicine. Started with myself, and then I generalized that to my patients.
Curcumin, or other people may recognize as a turmeric. We've been using it in foods for a long time. We've embraced different opportunities through nutrition. And then you said you got focused really in on senior pets. And in looking a little bit into your work, there's three kind of conditions that it seems like you highlight most frequently, and that's HCM, cancer, and chronic pain. Is that what you saw more frequently? Why these three did you kind of really hone in on when you were thinking about taking care of senior pets?
Well, I'm going to answer your question in just one second, but I do want to address the curcumin and turmeric that you'd spoken
Sure.
about because unfortunately, people conflate or confuse turmeric with curcumin. In the whole of a turmeric plant, there is only 3 to 4% of active ingredients, and those are the curcuminoids. And so when you and I take turmeric, just average turmeric, we're getting no biological benefit from it whatsoever because curcuminoids across the spectrum are very poorly absorbed. And so if you're into herbal therapy or into curcumin for its health benefits, please, one of the things you want to do is to study like hell on the bioavailability of the curcumin products that you're taking. Turmeric is a really no health benefit because of the very low concentration of curcuminoids in there and their poor bioavailability. So you really need to concentrate that up. All right. I'll stand down off my little curcumin bandwagon here and say that one of the things that I would tell you is the very interesting part about my little practice at this point from a telemedicine. For those of you who don't know, I run a consulting business centered around the care of older pets or how best to improve their longevity. And we could talk much more about that. But the thing that is most interesting to me is the fact that I get calls, I get emails from the weirdest places. I'm located out here on the coast of California, and I know you're back east where good veterinary care and oncology specialists or ortho specialists are relatively easy to find. But that's not necessarily the case in the middle of Missouri or the middle of Montana or the middle of Maine, places that I have lived. And it's very rewarding for me to be able to help those pets with cancer or help those pets with chronic pain or help those kitties with HCM, where local veterinary care is hard to find, especially local specialty care is very difficult to find. And so it's very rewarding to me to do that. And when you ask why those particular diseases, well, like Willie said about, robbing banks, that's where the money is, but that's when you have an older pet, those are the diseases that you see. You see chronic pain, you see cancer, you see dental disease is another big flyer for me. And there are limitations to being in a teleconsulting business. I can't snatch that infected carnassial tooth, but the reality is I can point the folks to places that can help them.
Mm. When you said dental, that also reminded me, as humans, we tend to make decisions or have behavior changes when there's a pain point. So when there's a disease, we start to get desperate. We'll do more research and things like that. But like when it comes to dental health, that's really important from a preventative standpoint. And I definitely believe that with good dental care, we can probably add a lot of years onto pet's life.
And so let me address that. I'm going to sneak a word in here and say that to the best of my knowledge, it is not documented in veterinary medicine, but on the human side, they showed that with significant periodontal disease, you experience a typical decline in lifespan by up to 15%. And
Wow.
so if you extrapolate that to our pets, that can be up to a year or two. And, and that's one thing that you found another area where Kevin likes to climb on a soapbox of some type, because I sell rapamycin. I sell a prescription longevity drug to the clients that are within my purview that has been proven to increase lifespan by up to 14%. And so many people, Dr. Megan, call or email saying, I want this drug. And then you talk to them about their pet's health history. And it's this little, a 12-year-old poodle who's never had a dental. And it's sometimes, people want the easy answer. They want the pill or the injection. And really what they need to do is understand that, at least as we think we understand at this point, the link between infection, the link between chronic inflammation, aging, and death is pretty significant. So listen, maybe we ought to take a better shot at just doing the simple stuff, cleaning your 12-year-old poodle's teeth before we start reaching for the stars with prescription longevity drugs.
So is that the conversation that you tend to have with them sometimes, is
Yes.
backing them up as needs?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because listen, and perhaps, this will fly two ways amongst your listeners, but I'm very much a traditional veterinarian in that I believe strongly in the benefits of diagnostics. And I told you the other day, one of the things that kills me about my veterinary education is that back in 1986, I graduated from UC Davis, I think one of the best schools around. And hell, we had zero dental training. I never took a dental class at UC Davis. And so I look back at my early career and think about how many pets I failed to help because I didn't know the benefits of taking dental x-rays, So yeah, I'm a diagnostic and dental procedure heavy guy. If you threw me back into a brick and mortar clinic, that's what I would hang my hat on, because I believe that test results and dentalists can buy you an awful lot of time with the pets we know and love. Now, onto that, I would superimpose the use of integrative therapy and prescription longevity drugs and acupuncture and laser therapy and a bunch of different things, because I think that they all add to our pet's health. But you got to start with the basics. And to me, that the basics are diagnostics and dental care for many of the pets, especially the small pets in our practices.
Correct me if I have got this wrong, but to me, it seems that you were also maybe earlier to embrace some of the options that are available for pets in your
Yeah.
practice. And when you have a conviction, when it's maybe not the most popular thought or decision, how do you handle that? So for you, going back to some of those moments and you started looking more into things, what was that journey like of looking at all these options, seeing potential benefits, wanting to try things that you weren't seeing people interested in trying, and they might have even disagreed with some of these things? Like, how did you handle that?
Well, gosh, another little Kevin rant is coming here. Because I told you the other day, and I think I created some angst on your part, that I think private veterinary practice right now, in large part, is broken. It's broken by virtue of the corporate intrusion into veterinary practice and the limitations that it places. In direct answer to your question, the reason I was able to perhaps add curcumin products or add rapamycin or add acupuncture or laser therapy into my patient care is because I was the one who was making the decisions. I was the one who was willing to invest in that $25,000 laser machine and hope that it paid off. And I was the one who, after doing an ACL repair or whatever the case may be, was able to say, hey, your pet needs this spur or this laser therapy or this acupuncture in an effort to speed and maximize their healing. And I think some of that has been lost along the way with the formularies that are mandated by some of the corporate entities within veterinary practice. And so my heart goes out to the younger veterinary generation here, because the two reasons I got into veterinary practice, I think when I look back on it, were independence. As a practice owner, if I didn't want to work that day, I didn't work. Now, let's take that with a grain of salt. But, I fired, clients from the practice if they abused my kids, my techs, my receptionists. I didn't have any second thoughts about that, nor did I have second thoughts about trying to bring the very best in science-backed and evidence-backed medicine, regardless of whether that was a steroid injection or acupuncture. So the fact that I was an independent veterinarian and practice owner back then gave me the latitude to try those things. And then pet parents, I think they're receptive to what works. So especially in some of the smaller areas that I worked in, word of mouth counts. And if Joe Schmo had a dog that was healed with laser therapy, all of a sudden all of Joe Schmo's neighbors learn about laser therapy. And so one thing leads to the next.
Yeah, and having the ability to just go and make a decision is helpful, and if that's something you feel strongly about, maybe practice ownership is the direction you wanna go, and so learn all you can where you are and build those skills and work towards getting there.
I think there are tremendous opportunities. I mean, listen, I understand if I was coming out of school, the dollars associated with a corporate job, the fact maybe there's some loan forgiveness or a little bonus thrown in, all those things are good. But I think that there are tremendous opportunities. In fact, I would suggest to you that the largest opportunities in small animal practice right now are centered around true private practices, not corporate entities, but practices that defy that corporate model, where you can, in fact, build those relationships. You can, in fact, book on 45-minute or hour appointments for orthopedics or derm or whatever you choose to. And really, you take the time. Pet parents are looking for one family doctor. And if there are young veterinarians, out there, sure, get the money while you can, get the training while you can, but don't completely eliminate the thought of practicing by yourself, because I think that's where the rewards are. I think over the longer term, you can make more money than in a corporate practice, and you can have a lot more fun doing it.
Yeah, that ownership aspect of it, right? That's a very different than being an employee
Yeah.
model. But also a whole 'nother group of responsibilities and things too, so you
Yeah.
have to
There's
understand
some
how you
pains
like.
associated with it for sure.
Exactly, there's pros and cons, you gotta find the pros you like the best and the cons you can handle. So, I definitely agree that there's a lot of opportunities still out there, there's still very strong practices of all different sizes, and there are pet parents who will shop around until they find the vet that they really like and want to stay with, and so find your spot. And talking about practice, and you mentioned you built several, I think you said eight different practices
Yeah.
across your career and sold them. Is that the time that you decided to go into telehealth?
Those cons of practice ownership added up for me. Full disclosure, I built a fairly large, a 25-person, 30-person practice from scratch along the California coast. And the offer that I was made by one of the corporate acquirers was just too good to pass up. It really translated into 8 or 10 years of work in the clinic. That was the equivalent. And I was, I think, 60 at that point in time. So why not take that? It was the proverbial offer that was too good to pass up. But I love being in California, but the reality is there's some regulations around veterinary practice ownership and premises and things like that that just became somewhat onerous. And so I chose to go ahead and just start a little practice. I thought, well, how big can a little teleconsulting practice go? Because I am very much a relationship builder, and it's nice to build that relationship, whether it be with somebody from California in my backyard or somebody in Washington or Wisconsin or wherever, because there are these pests that kind of slip through the cracks from traditional veterinary care. as a 66-year-old, the luxury of developing my own schedule and perhaps not having as many restrictions on my business, they were very appealing. And so I started this little teleconsulting business as a side hustle, and it's grown to the point where really I could be busy 7 days a week if I chose.
And when we were going back to thinking about senior pets, longevity, we're hearing them a lot right now. I think some of that is that our pets are living longer. I think some of that is that pet owners are more and more seeing their pets, not only family, but like even sometimes they love them more than family, the human family. So people really, really care about their pets. They really want them to have not just quantity of life, but quality of life too. And that because those are the things that they're really going to see on a day to day basis. And then, like I said, longevity seems to be the hot thing right now. And, in different companies opening up and marketing and all of that. I'm sure I'm preparing your podium for you to go on.
Here we go
Uh,
again, she says.
yeah. No, this is good because, since this is what a lot of people are interested in and talking about, what have you seen as kind of over time when we're thinking about this topic? How has that changed and how have you embraced that, seeing the best benefit for pets under your care?
Well, I think I would add to the list of your motivations, but the fact, again, I'm 66 and I'm kind of at the tail end of the baby boomer generation, but the reality is that mortality, that's a lot closer for me than it is for a young girl like you. And so, there's this huge mushroom cloud of baby boomers out there, and they're all looking around and thinking, well, gosh, all of a sudden the end is a little bit more clearly in sight, than the beginning used to be. And, so what can we do for our own health? That's really, I think, where the conversation begins for many pet parents. And then it's not too much of a jump to look over at the cat that's sitting on the sofa or the dog who's sleeping at your feet to think, well, what can we do for their health as well? So, I think there's increasing motivation on the part of many of these pet parents to really look at alternatives as their pets age. I think that you're right. I think that pets are in general living longer, whether that be to, the diets that you're so intimately involved in or better technical care, the dental care that we've spoken about, the ability to do a MRI or a CT on these pets and really learn about the plumbing inside. And so I think that veterinary care is a component to the increasing lifespan of pets. But the reality is also this. The average veterinarian is, booking on the 20-minute interval, and we veterinarians are hell on wheels when it comes to dealing with abscesses and cuts and vaccines and spays and neuters. But it's very difficult sometimes to sit down and really develop a plan, not so much for the next 2 months or 3 months, but sometimes for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. That's the luxury that I have in this little teleconsulting practice, is that I do have that luxury of time. So on the one hand, I would tell you veterinarians, there's a tremendous opportunity. I think one of the things that if there are entrepreneurs amongst your listeners, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for veterinary longevity clinics, so to speak, where you are centered around just longevity science for pets. And you have the force plates to look at lame pets objectively, and you have the dental care as a specialty. And you have, there are ways that a person could segment a very successful practice in certain areas of the country centered specifically around longevity care. And, at this point, I'm kind of an N of one. I don't think that there are an awful lot of veterinarians that are concentrating on longevity science, but I invite every one of you into the field because I think it'd be very rewarding for you.
Maybe they're not all using that term, but I'm starting to see more and more veterinarians that I speak to that are leaning more into preventative health. But I think, we're still trained to find disease, right?
Yeah.
Find the disease and treat the disease. And so thinking about it more from the preventative side, and maybe as we kind of come back to, you know, the goals of education, we won't get too deep into this. We've had conversations with people who are really focused on education and rethinking on what does a brand new graduate really need to look like? What are they
Yeah.
most likely going to be doing? And that may not be exactly how we've been training, but there are great opportunities, and I think maybe pet parents are more open to thinking more preventative. I think we're finally getting that mindset more, and maybe that's it. I didn't stop to think about it, the baby boomers. There's a large population of baby boomers.
Yeah.
A lot of them are still pet parents too, and so maybe that does help open up. Oh, it's not just about go to the vet when there's something wrong. There really is something to that preventative health, and I think even the, like, Gen Z generation is gonna be thinking more that way too. Heard a great person who focuses on it's Intelligence is her tagline, the intelligence of the different generations, and she described Gen Z as being the generation that, through a very important part of their development process, went through COVID, and COVID was this time when it was a health scare. So health was one of the most important things that was kind of talked about and focused on. And so then themselves also have potentially this mindset of preventative and keeping myself healthy. So all the more that I just continue to see this as being a trend in a direction. Any comments there before I throw a
No, no,
hypothetical?
I'm going to be quiet for a change.
So I have a hypothetical question, and you kind of started going down it, and so I'm really curious if you could build your dream longevity practice, like brick and mortar, like today. What would that look like? What would you include? What would be some of the first things that you would implement into that practice?
All right. Well, here I'll make a shameless plug, and that is that the thing that deters me most about opening a bricks and mortar longevity practice is the thought that I'd be the veterinarian running it 7 days a week. And so, if you have listeners who are interested in thinking about this, in some of the bigger cities and throughout the country, let me know. I mean, you and I can partner on this because I think there is tremendous opportunity, and I just don't want to be the old fart in the clinic 7 days a week. So, with that being said, I think that for the demographic pets you and I are thinking about, if we were to serve clients most perfectly, these would be office visits that were centered, probably around an hour long initial session. Building the relationship, for somebody like me, that's what it comes down to first. But from a scientific perspective, you have to look at the care of these older pets. I mean, it'd be nice to be pretty good with an ultrasound machine, with ultrasound probe. It'd be pretty good to have at least a tech team that was just hell on wheels with dental care. I mean, that they're either way around a patient's mouth. It'd be nice to have the force plates or a way to go ahead and look at orthopedic discomfort objectively. These are things that many veterinary clinics just simply don't have. I will say that if veterinarians of my age, I'd spay a kitty in the morning and I'd plate a dog's tibia in the afternoon. I mean, that was very common for me in some of these areas. And I think veterinary practices these days have a tendency to refer some of the cases. And I understand referring to veterinarians who are better than you and me, the GPs of the world. But the reality is, I also think that many of these practices, many pet parents are looking for that family doctor. They don't want to go to 3 different places or 4 different places to get the very, very best care of their pets. And so for those little entrepreneurs amongst you, try to figure out a way to keep those pet parents in your practice as opposed to referring them. Build that specialty network if you need to, but have a quality veterinary care right there in your own building, and you'll do just fine.
I think we do have some pretty good entrepreneurs out there as well. And again, even if it's
Send
not
them my way, doc. Send them my way.
by all means, I love to connect people, so that's why I thought that question would be interesting, just hypothetical. If one, I was just curious, like today, what that would look like. But I think there are people who would love to do that, and so starting that spark of ideas flowing, and by all means, we'll send people your way. So, when you think about where we are today with longevity science, what excites you the most? Like, where do you think is the biggest opportunities, and especially for other people in veterinary medicine, where would you direct them to start really focusing in if they want to make the biggest impact for their patients?
I think that the next decade is going to be one of tremendous increase in knowledge around longevity science. And again, I think it's centered, to be honest with you, about all us old humans. They're getting old and afraid of dying, and so there's this theory among some folks that, if you and I can live for the next 10 years or 15 years, that science will be such that you can live indefinitely beyond that point. Now, I don't know. That's a pretty optimistic thought, but this thought of critical mass where scientific knowledge will catch up to the point where you can live indefinitely if you can just survive until that time. There might be some BS associated with that, but I think that the underlying point is true, and that is that there are probably billions with a B, billions of dollars that are being poured into the longevity science component. And admittedly, 99.9% of that is human. And so right now, schmoes like me are looking at trying to understand human longevity science and see what we can apply safely to the patients in our care. But I hope that longer term, there will be more dog studies. Dog Aging Project, of course, is the big fish, but other projects that use interventions with a placebo arm, a blinded study, so that you and I can really attach some significance to it. The difficulty, Dr. Megan, is this for right now, and that is you and I are very good at measuring liver inflammation with ALT and, measuring kidney function with urinary protein or whatever the case may be. There is no one longevity marker in either humans or in pets to say that the interventions that you are using, whether it be herbal therapy or, the rapamycin, the iospaus, or whatever the case may be, are really making a benefit. And people talk about telomere length and people talk about biological clocks, methylation clocks. But the reality is that we have a long way to go before we understand any metric that you and I can use to measure longevity. If we can achieve some semblance of everybody agreeing on that one metric, then all of a sudden I think that will really open the door to scientific study at that point, because then we have something to measure against. And right now you have 200 people going in 300 different directions. And it would be nice if those 200 people instead went on one or two different directions and were able to concentrate their work.
Yes, I have been in conversations about like what can we measure. And right now, the best things that we have are longevity studies, but they're longevity studies, which means they take years. A look at trends and things like that. And it would be much nicer if we could just have markers and measures that we could do quickly. I think you're right. Like once we have that, I think the amount of research that we can do and the information that we can gather from it would accelerate. But well, what else keeps you excited these days? What do you enjoy talking about and make sure that we get to talk about together?
I am passionate about my little project and all the different ways that you and I can intervene to help our pets live longer. Because I think without bullshit, I think that you and I can add 20 to 25% to our average pet's life if we start early and incorporate that dental care and maybe raise a question or two about why this vaccine is being used and whether that's really appropriate for the pets in our care. And think about the diets that you're so intimately involved with, or and take kind of a global, a truly holistic set of care of these younger to middle-aged patients. And I think we can really bend the curve for those patients. I honestly believe that. And so it's a fascinating time for me. I really enjoy that. I'm able to build the relationships that I want to build and fix the occasional pet, even if it is via a modem or via a computer screen instead of laying my hands on them. And so it's an exciting time.
Speaking about relationships and going back to the story you said about watching senior dogs lose their pet parent, and then these poor senior dogs get put into shelters. And I've interviewed people where they specifically focus on senior pet shelters, and they it's a very different approach. Like you have to prepare people of these senior dogs may have health conditions that they have to take care of, and
Yeah.
they're not going to have as many years. But just since that was also something that really struck you, have you done anything specifically there or anything else there that you've kind of come back to try to improve that scenario?
Well, I've adopted a couple of these older pets, a
Same.
little Cavalier King Charles named Phoebe comes to mind. And so,
Oh,
yeah, because it's difficult. I mean, if you're really in veterinary medicine because for the love of pets, and I think most of us are, it's hard to see an older pet go through that. Younger pets, of course, are more resilient, but some of these older pets have a difficult time adjusting to that change. And so There are a couple of shelters that I work closely with throughout California that again are centered around the care of older pets, and that resonates with me. So listen, you guys, if you have listeners that are in that game, let me know. I'll help you. I will help you guys financially or products or whatever I can do because we're all in this together.
That's another thing I think that's so fun about being in this profession is we do have so many people who care greatly about people, about pets, and I'm seeing more and more collaborations and partnerships, which are really exciting. I think that's where we can go far is if you go together. Excited to see people work together to hopefully move the needle when it comes to, again, quantity of life is great, but it's not great if it's not quality of life too. So there's a lot that we can do together to work on both aspects of taking care of pets.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah. Well, my last question, I always like to end on this one is what is something you're very grateful for right now?
Gosh, there are several different things. I mean, the reality is that put me on the spot. I'm grateful for a new romance. I went through a divorce recently, and I have a new romance in my life, and it's nice to hear the words "I love you." I'm grateful for my little puppy Annabelle, who, when she's not destroying things, can actually be a very good dog. And I'm grateful for people like you, Dr. Megan, that look to build the veterinary world. You're trying to improve the veterinary world one little bit at a time, and my hat goes off to you. You're the next generation of veterinarian, and I look forward to you seeing what you can do throughout your career.
Dr. Kevin Toman has a distinct voice, witty, deeply experienced, and genuinely passionate. If the conversation has piqued your curiosity about longevity medicine, I hope you'll continue to explore. Whether you're a general practitioner looking to incorporate more preventative and longevity-focused care, or an entrepreneur wondering if a senior pet longevity clinic might be your next chapter, Kevin has welcomed further conversation. If you're interested in his telehealth consulting practice, collaborating on a longevity clinic concept, or supporting senior pet shelters in your area, links to connect with Dr. Kevin are in the show notes. For a full summary of the key takeaways from today's episode and ways to apply them to your own practice and career, head over to the Sprinkle of Wisdom Substack for the Podcast Club Guide. If you want to support the podcast, make sure you're subscribed and share it with someone in veterinary medicine who you think might appreciate it. Until next time, keep reimagining what's possible in veterinary life.